"There is no seat for you at this table," my daughter-in-law said, holding out a paper plate. "Not my good china. A thin, flimsy paper plate, the kind you buy in bulk for a child's birthday party." She pushed it toward my chest with 2 fingers like she was handing something to a stranger on the street. "You can eat in the kitchen. We're a little crowded in here." I looked past her shoulder. My dining room table, the one I'd built by hand from reclaimed oak 20 years ago, seated 12 people, none of whom I recognized. My son sat at the far end. He saw me. He looked down at his plate. I took the paper plate. I walked to the kitchen. I set it on the counter without putting a single thing on it. Then I picked up my coat, walked out the back door, got into my truck, and drove away. Before I get into what happened next, if you're watching this, please take a moment to subscribe and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. The house, in the rearview mirror, still had my name on the deed. I'd built the addition on the east side with my own hands. I'd poured the back patio slab on a summer weekend 23 years ago with my brother. Every shingle, every porch board, every window frame, I knew where I'd sourced it and what it cost. My late wife had picked the gray paint for the shutters 2 weeks before she got her diagnosis. 3 years ago, when my son and his wife were struggling, I'd told them they could stay there while they got back on their feet. Temporary. That was the word I'd used. Temporary. It was Christmas Eve. I drove 30 minutes to my apartment, the modest one I'd moved into after offering them the house, and sat at my kitchen table without taking off my coat. The apartment smelled like coffee and old wood, and the quiet that comes from living alone. I'd grown used to it. Tonight, it felt different. My daughter-in-law had been pushing boundaries since the day my son brought her home 6 years ago. Small things at first, rearranging furniture without asking, making decisions about the house without calling me, asking my son to skip our Tuesday lunches because she had plans. Then bigger things. Taking over the spare room I kept for visiting. Changing the locks without mentioning it, so I had to ring the bell to enter my own property. Each time I said nothing, I told myself I was being generous. Patient. Keeping the peace for my son's sake. Tonight she handed me a paper plate and pointed me to the kitchen of the house I owned. I finally stopped calling it keeping the peace. I got up and opened the filing cabinet I kept in the second bedroom. Property deeds, bank statements, the folder I kept for the rental house. 3 years of utility bills, all paid from my account. Property taxes, same. Insurance, maintenance calls, every repair receipt. My son and his wife had paid nothing, not $1. I'd never asked them to, but I'd also never agreed to fund them indefinitely. I sat back down with the folders spread across the table and did the math I'd been avoiding. Market rent for that property, in our county, $1,800 a month, 36 months, $64,800. I wrote that number on the top of a legal pad. Below it I wrote the business question. 8 months ago, my daughter-in-law had asked if she could help with administrative work for my electrical contracting business. I was swamped with 2 commercial projects and she'd offered to handle scheduling and client intake calls. She had an associate's degree in business and seemed organized. I'd given her access to the client contact list and the company email. I'd trusted her because my son trusted her. I stared at that decision for a long time in the silence of my apartment. Something Diane had said 2 weeks ago surfaced in my memory. Diane handled my bookkeeping. She'd mentioned a client who called asking about a deposit refund, said the client was confused about why the job had been pushed back twice. I'd told Diane I didn't have a deposit on file for that client, assumed there was a scheduling mix-up, told her I'd look into it. I never did. Christmas preparation had buried it. At 11:30, I picked up the phone and called Frank Caldwell. Frank had handled legal work for my business for 12 years. He picked up on the 4th ring, voice rough with sleep. "It's Walter," I said. "I need a meeting first thing tomorrow. I know it's Christmas morning. I'll pay double." Silence. Then, 7:30, my office. Frank had heard something in my voice the same way I'd heard something in my own. I spent the rest of the night pulling statements. I didn't sleep. Frank's office smelled like leather and old coffee. He looked like he'd given up on sleep around the same time I had. He listened without interrupting while I laid out the property situation. No lease, no rent payments, sole ownership, 3 years of documentation. He nodded through all of it, with the steady expression of a man who'd heard worse. Then I told him about the deposit issue and the business email access. His expression changed. "You gave her client intake access," he said slowly. "Scheduling client calls. That's what I understood it to be. Does she have access to the company bank account?" I stopped. She shouldn't. But I gave her login access to the billing platform so she could send invoices. Frank leaned forward. "Walter, before we talk eviction, I want you to pull every transaction from your business account for the past 8 months. Tonight. Can you do that?" I could. Frank drafted the eviction notice while I sat at his conference table with my laptop open. Notice to vacate, 30 days, Texas residential property law, formal and precise. He also drafted a separate demand letter for back rent calculated at market value, which was admissible in civil court even without a lease, given the circumstances. He'd file both by certified mail the next business day. I drove home through the empty Christmas morning streets. The demand letters were prepared. The process had started. But Frank's question about the business account sat in my chest like a splinter. I opened the billing platform at my kitchen table and scrolled backward 8 months. 3 client deposits I hadn't processed. $12,000 for a residential panel upgrade in a subdivision I didn't work in. $8,500 for a commercial lighting contract I'd never bid on. $11,000 for a whole home rewire I had no record of scheduling. $31,500 total. All deposited into the business account. All transferred out within 48 hours to an account I didn't recognize. I called Diane at 8 in the morning, Christmas or not. She answered on the second ring. "I was going to call you this week," she said. "I found more." 40 minutes later, I was at her kitchen table looking at her laptop screen. Diane had been reconciling end-of-year accounts and found a pattern she hadn't understood until she saw it all together. My daughter-in-law had used the company email and my contractor license number to contact potential clients, collect deposits, and promise job timelines that were never real. She'd posed as an office manager. She'd used my reputation, 31 years of licensed electrical work in this county, as the bait. Diane had identified 5 clients so far. Total deposits, $47,000. "There might be more," she said carefully. "I haven't finished." I stared at the screen for a long time. My contractor license, the one I'd tested for twice, passed on the second try, maintained without a single violation for 3 decades. My name on every job I'd ever done. She'd worn it like a costume. I called Frank from Diane's driveway. "Forget the eviction timeline for now," he said after I told him. "We need to file a police report today. This is felony theft by deception and potentially wire fraud. The contractor license element makes it a separate criminal offense in Texas. Walter, this isn't just a family dispute anymore." The county sheriff's office assigned a detective named Michael Reyes. Mid-50s, quiet, unhurried. He reviewed Diane's documentation with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to react until he had the full picture. He photographed every page. He entered case numbers into his system with the same energy he might use to file grocery receipts, methodical, unhurried, thorough. "I'll need to contact each client," he said. "Have them file individual complaints. That builds the case. How many complaints do you need before it becomes serious?" He looked up. 1 is serious. 5 is a pattern. A pattern is a felony. That afternoon, my son called. I'd been expecting it. The certified mail notification had gone out electronically before the physical letter arrived, and Frank's letterhead alone was enough to send a message. "Dad." His voice was tight, controlled. "What is this?" "You'll receive the formal notice tomorrow," I said. "You have 30 days. You're evicting us." He said it like he was testing whether the sentence was real. "I'm reclaiming my property. You've lived there 3 years without paying rent." That was never the permanent arrangement. Silence, long enough that I could hear him breathing. "She said you were looking for an excuse. After last night. This has nothing to do with last night." "Dad." 30 days. "Read the notice carefully." I ended the call. He called back 4 times. I didn't answer. My daughter-in-law called once, late that evening. I didn't recognize the number until I looked it up. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 23 seconds long, and I deleted it without listening. I went to bed at 9 and slept for 10 hours. First real sleep in days. The physical notices were delivered Tuesday morning. Frank texted me the signature confirmation at 10:14 a.m. My daughter-in-law had signed for both. By noon, she'd posted on Facebook. I found out through my neighbor, Carol, who called me at 1 o'clock sounding distressed. "Walter, there's a post about you. It's getting shared." I didn't know what to do. I opened Facebook and searched her name. The post was long and carefully written, which told me she'd been preparing it before the notice arrived. The headline read, "My father-in-law is evicting us 2 days after Christmas. We have nowhere to go." She described me as unpredictable, vindictive, a man who'd never accepted her into the family, who'd been looking for a reason to punish them since my wife died. She wrote about my son how devoted he was, how hard he was trying, how frightened she was. What she didn't mention: 3 years of free housing, $47,000 in fraudulent deposits using my license, the 5 clients who'd paid for work that never happened. What she did mention: my wife's death, the empty house, how she and my son had kept it maintained and cared for it like their own. One photograph of the house in summer, beautiful and green, implying ownership through proximity. The post had 94 comments within 2 hours. Most of them were sympathetic. 3 of those comments were from clients of mine, people I'd worked with for years. One of them wrote, "Sorry to hear this. Walter always seemed like a decent man. Surprised." The words seemed carried all the weight. I called Frank. "Don't respond," he said immediately. "Not a word. Not publicly. Not privately. She wants engagement. She wants a screenshot of you defending yourself because that's more ammunition. My reputation is taking damage in real time. Your reputation will survive the truth. Her version of events won't survive the criminal investigation. Do you trust the process?" I thought about that. "I trust you." Then let her talk. We respond in court. I put my phone down and watched the comment count climb. 64, 91, 112. My name being shaped into something I didn't recognize by someone who had stolen from the people who trusted me. The next morning, Diane called again. She'd found a 6th client. His name was Robert Garfield, retired school administrator. He'd paid $14,000 for a whole house generator installation that my company supposedly contracted 8 months ago. He'd been told there were supply chain delays. He'd been told 3 times over the following months that the parts were on back order. He'd never thought to call my office directly because he'd been dealing with my office manager by email the whole time. He'd been waiting patiently for 8 months. I called him myself. "Mr. Garfield," I said, "my name is Walter Brandt. I own Brandt Electrical. I don't have any record of your contract in my files, and I want you to know that I am currently working with law enforcement to address what I believe happened to you." Silence on his end. Then, "She told me you were semi-retired, that she handled the new clients." The same script, word for word. We met at Detective Reyes's office the following morning. Robert Garfield brought a folder. Manila, the same tan color as mine. He set it on the table between us, and we didn't need to explain anything to each other. We both understood what we were sitting next to. Within the week, Detective Reyes had contacted all 6 clients. Every one of them filed a complaint. He also identified 2 additional victims through cross-referencing a small restaurant owner who'd paid $9,000 for commercial wiring that never happened, and a retired couple who'd paid $6,000 for a panel upgrade that was never scheduled. 8 victims total. Combined losses, $71,000, all traced to accounts connected to my daughter-in-law. On a Thursday afternoon, Reyes called me with a flat, professional voice. "We have enough for an arrest warrant." I sat down slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. I wanted you to hear it from me first." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time. My son called that evening. Different tone this time. The controlled anger was gone. What replaced it was something raw, something that reminded me of how he'd sounded at 14 when he'd broken the garage window and came to confess. "Dad, the police came to the house today." "I know. They were asking about her, about the business, what she was doing with the email account." A pause that stretched long enough to hurt. "Dad, what did she do? I think you already know some of it." "She said it was a misunderstanding, that she was trying to help, that clients misunderstood the timeline. 8 clients, son, $71,000. The silence was different from all the other silences. This one had the specific weight of a man reassembling what he thought was real. "She told me you were trying to trap her," he said finally, that you'd been planning this since Christmas Eve. The detective will walk you through the evidence. It's documented. I should have. He stopped. Started again. I didn't know about the deposits. I believe you. Another long pause. She made me feel like I had to choose. Every time I tried to see you, there was always something. Always a reason. I thought I was just trying to keep my marriage together. I'd watched my son shrink for 3 years. I'd told myself it was normal marriage adjustment, that he was finding his footing, that I needed to give them space. I'd handed my daughter-in-law access to my business because I wanted her to feel trusted. I'd told myself patience was love. Come over Saturday morning, I said. We'll talk. She was arrested Friday morning. Frank called me after Reyes confirmed. Booked on multiple counts: theft by deception, fraudulent use of a contractor license, wire fraud. The charges carried real weight. This wasn't a misdemeanor. Her attorney filed a motion Friday afternoon, attempting to tie the criminal charges to the eviction, arguing retaliatory intent. Frank had that motion dismissed before the weekend. The two proceedings were legally separate. The eviction stood on its own documentation. The criminal case stood on 8 victims and $71,000 in documented theft. My son came Saturday morning. He looked like he hadn't slept. He sat at my kitchen table and didn't say anything for a while. Just wrapped his hands around the coffee mug I'd set in front of him and stared at the table. She told me you never liked her, he said. From the beginning. That everything you did was about controlling us. Did you believe that? He was quiet. Sometimes. When I was angry. When I'd missed another Tuesday lunch and she had a reason that seemed to make sense at the time. He shook his head slowly. I kept waiting for you to fight back. To push. When you didn't, I thought maybe she was right. That you were just done with us. I was trying not to make you choose. I know that now. I refilled his coffee. Outside, the January morning was gray and still. What happens to her? He asked. That's up to the court system. He nodded slowly. And the house? The notice stands, 30 days from when it was served. I met his eyes. But son, you don't have to leave with her. You understand that. He looked up. If you need a place to stay while you figure things out, I have the spare room. No conditions. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he nodded. One small movement that meant more than any speech. 3 weeks later, we stood together in the gallery of the district courtroom as the eviction hearing opened. My daughter-in-law arrived with her attorney, a woman named Patricia Wells, who moved through the courtroom with brisk efficiency. My son sat beside me, not at his wife's table. She'd looked for him when she entered. When she found him next to me, something crossed her face that wasn't quite surprise. Judge Carolyn Marcus presided. She reviewed the property documents with the quiet focus of someone who'd seen 1,000 variations of this argument. Frank presented in his methodical way. Deed in my name, sole ownership, 22 years. Tax records, every payment from my account. No lease agreement, no payment history. 3 years of occupancy. He didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. Wells argued abandonment of ownership, that I'd essentially gifted the property through long-term free occupancy, that eviction was retaliatory given the timing of the criminal case. Judge Marcus listened to the full argument, then asked one question. Does your client have documentation of any payment made to the property owner at any point during the 3-year occupancy? Wells shuffled papers. The relationship was understood to be a family arrangement. Documentation. Counselor. No, Your Honor. Judge Marcus made a brief note. The property owner's rights are clear. Eviction granted. 14 days to vacate. She paused. Regarding the criminal matter that will proceed on its own timeline. This court makes no connection between the two proceedings. The gavel came down. In the hallway afterward, my daughter-in-law stood by the water fountain with Wells. She watched my son walk out of the courtroom beside me. She started toward him. We need to talk. Her voice was quiet. Please, just us. My son stopped. He didn't look at me for permission. He'd stopped doing that 3 days ago. We already have talked, he said. I've read the statements, the emails, the bank records. I've had 2 weeks to sit with it. Those clients weren't real losses. I was going to make it right. You used my father's name. His voice stayed level, but I could hear the effort it took. His license, his 30 years. You wore it to steal from people who trusted him. And then when he found out, You put it on Facebook and made him the villain. She shifted tactics. Softer voice, the one she used when she wanted something. I did it for us. We had debt. You know how bad it was. I was trying to fix it by stealing from an old retired couple who saved for a year to fix their electrical panel. She had no answer for that. Wells touched her client's arm gently. A signal. Don't keep talking. My son turned to me. Let's go. We walked out of the courthouse into February cold. He stopped at the top of the steps and exhaled, long and slow, like he'd been holding his breath for 3 years. I should have seen it, he said. You were too close. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed, but it's the truth. The criminal trial came 6 weeks later. I'd half expected her to accept a plea deal, but she didn't. Her attorney argued misrepresentation without criminal intent, that she'd believed she had implied authority to act on behalf of the business. The prosecution spent one afternoon presenting 8 sets of documents, 8 clients on the stand, 8 stories of waiting for work that never came. The jury was out less than 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Judge Marcus sentenced her at a separate hearing 2 weeks after the verdict. I attended. My son did not, which I understood. Each of the 8 victims had submitted written statements. Detective Reyes read a summary of the case's scope and the deliberate nature of the scheme, the scripted language used with clients, the fake delay excuses, the careful routing of deposits to avoid triggering automatic bank flags. It was not impulsive. It was not a misunderstanding. Judge Marcus reviewed everything before speaking. The defendant exploited family trust, a professional license earned over 30 years of legitimate work, and the reputation of an honest businessman to defraud 8 victims. The premeditation here is not subtle. The harm is not abstract. She sentenced my daughter-in-law to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years supervised probation. Full restitution to all 8 victims. Permanent revocation of any authority to operate under a contractor's license in this state. When the sentence was read, I felt nothing dramatic, just a kind of stillness, like the moment after a long machine finally stops running. I walked out of the courtroom into afternoon sun, found a bench on the courthouse plaza, and sat down. Frank sat beside me after a moment. That's everything, he said. Criminally, civilly. It's done. The restitution payments to the 8 clients. Start next month through the probation officer. Court supervised. She misses 1 payment, she violates probation. I nodded slowly. 18 months. With potential early release at 12 for good behavior. But the conviction is permanent. The record follows her. I thought about Robert Garfield, who'd waited 8 months for a generator that never came. The retired couple who'd paid for a panel upgrade with money they'd saved carefully. The restaurant owner who'd borrowed against a small business loan and been defrauded. They'd get their money back in monthly installments. It wasn't whole, but it was acknowledged. What do I owe you? I asked. Frank named a number. 14,000 in legal fees between the eviction and the criminal cooperation. 8,000 in house repairs she'd punched through 2 walls during the last week of occupancy, whether from rage or as a message, I wasn't certain. 22,000 total. 22,000 to stop someone from taking everything I'd built. Frank had said something right about perspective. My son moved into the spare room 6 days after the eviction. He didn't bring much. A duffel bag the first night, the rest of his things over the following week in the back of his truck. He was quiet those first days, and I gave him room. We had coffee together in the mornings before he left for work. We didn't talk about her. We talked about ordinary things, the project he was on, the old television I was thinking about replacing, whether the rain was going to hold off through the weekend. On the 3rd week, he stayed up late on a Thursday, and we sat at the kitchen table past 10 o'clock, talking in the way we used to, before she'd started filling all the available space. When did you first know? He asked. I suspected something was wrong with the business deposits before Christmas, but I think I knew something was wrong with the situation for longer than that. Why didn't you say anything? I thought about how to answer that honestly, because every time I came close to it, I knew you'd have to choose. And I didn't want to be the one who made you choose. I thought if I waited, you'd see it yourself. I paused. I was wrong about that. My waiting gave her more time. He was quiet for a moment. She told me once that you resented her for taking me from you after Mom died, that all your generosity was guilt. Do you believe that? He looked up. No. I stopped believing it about 6 months ago, but I didn't know what to do with that, so I just kept going. I understand that more than you'd think. He managed a short, tired laugh. Yeah, I guess you would. We sat there a while longer. The house settled around us with familiar sounds, the heater cycling on, the refrigerator, the occasional car outside. My son drank the last of his coffee. I have an appointment with a divorce attorney Monday morning, he said. Frank can give you a referral if you need one. Already have a name. Coworker used her. Said she was good. He stood, stretched. I want to do this right. Clean. No more mess. That's the right call. He put his mug in the sink, paused at the kitchen doorway. Dad, I want to work for you again. When things settle, if you'd have me. I'd brought him into the business summers during high school. He'd worked 2 years after trade school before meeting her, before everything moved in a different direction. He had his apprentice license somewhere in a box. Talk to me in the spring, I said. Let's see where things are. He nodded and went to bed. I sat at the table a little longer. On the counter near the window, I'd kept something since Christmas Eve. A paper plate, still flat and clean, the one I'd taken and never used. I'd kept it as a reminder, a small, weightless record of a moment I'd needed to stay angry enough to act. I picked it up, folded it once, and walked it to the trash bin in the garage. Let it fall to the bottom without ceremony. It made a small, nothing sound. That was all it deserved. Spring came in slowly that year. My son filed his divorce papers in March. They were uncontested. She had no grounds to fight them from where she was, finalized in 60 days. Robert Garfield called me in April to say the first restitution payment had arrived. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded tired, the way people sound when something is over but can't quite be undone. I told him I was sorry for what happened on my behalf, using my name as a weapon against him. You didn't do it, he said. It was done with what I handed over. You can't control what someone does with your trust. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. In May, my son came to the office on a Monday morning. Clean work clothes, his old tool belt, the one I'd bought him when he got his license. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just set the tool belt on the truck seat and looked at me. Tell me what we have today, he said. We had a panel upgrade out on the east side and a commercial conduit run downtown. Full day, honest work. I handed him the folder. We drove out in the morning sun with the radio on low and the windows down. My son reviewed the job specs while I drove. Normal morning. Unremarkable. Mine. We talked sometimes about the past year, never all at once. In pieces, the way you sort through a thing gradually. He admitted he'd known something was off with the business emails and had pushed the thought away because confronting it meant confronting everything. I admitted I should have ended the rent-free arrangement at 1 year instead of letting it compound. We were both honest about what we'd chosen not to see. The divorce was final in late May. He marked the day by coming home late, sitting on the back porch and drinking 1 beer slowly while watching the yard go dark. I left him alone with that. In June, he started looking at apartments. Said he needed his own space to figure out what came next. I understood that. He found a small place 2 miles away, moved in on a Saturday. We loaded his truck in the morning, took 3 trips, were done by noon. Standing outside his new apartment in the summer heat, he looked at me with the expression he used to have as a kid when he finished something he wasn't sure he could do. I'll come for dinner Tuesday, he said. I'll make something decent. He drove away. I got in my truck and sat there a moment before starting it. The tool belt was on the back seat, extra one he'd left by accident. I'd drop it off Tuesday. Down the street, a couple walked a dog. A neighbor 2 houses over was mowing. Normal Saturday sounds, normal summer life going on around me without drama or consequence. 47 years of licensed electrical work in this county, and not a single client I'd cheated or a promise I'd broken. Nobody was going to take that. Nobody had. I turned the key and drove home through the summer morning. Windows down, radio on, nothing waiting for me, but an ordinary day. The kind I'd stopped noticing for 3 years while someone was quietly trying to take everything I'd built. I noticed it now. That was enough. If this story meant something to you, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Arcane Vengeance. I read every comment. Thank you for being here.